Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and supporters of Brexit may still be searching for those tangible benefits we asked for, like a particularly unlucky metal detectorist, but less than a year into the government of a party that have gone, do you know what, we should work with the EU. That has yielded very tangible benefits for cooperating. Cheaper food. In fact, there's a second benefit as well, potentially a third, which follows on from this. But first, for daily news and politics, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, rising food prices, little bit of a government killer. Numerous governments have fallen in elections over the past couple of years, thanks in part to the increased cost of living. Food prices are under pressure worldwide, result of harvest and supply problems caused by war, climate change, COVID-related transport and worker shortages, as well as the costs of production increasing. But in the UK, we decided that's a bit tame. We want even more inflation. So we left the EU via the most insane way possible. Granted, when the decision was made, people weren't thinking of major and prolonged wars in Europe and the Middle East or COVID, but they were all foreseeable events. And as I keep saying, even the Conservatives considered a global pandemic to be the number one threat to the nation. So they were aware of the possibility. But on top of all the global pressures, the extreme Tory Brexit added another chunk onto the cost of food. But now things are looking better thanks to savings from the agreement announced last month. The government have now cancelled the Brexit Red Tape, which was due to come into effect in just a few weeks, which would have added extra Brexit costs to fruit and veg in particular, given that we import 40% of it from the EU. However, unlike the many times I've discussed the government scrapping trade border checks in the past, this time it's not postponing it, it's not kicking the can down the road. We won't actually be needing them, thanks to the agreement at the UK-EU summit last month. We may still be hunting for tangible benefits of Brexit, but we already have one identified for the tangible benefits of anti-Brexit, moving closer to the EU. When we left the EU Single Market and Customs Union an hour before the start of 2021, the EU had everything in place to carry out the World Trade Organization style checks that the Brexiteers were so keen on. Overnight, some products couldn't be exported to the EU at all. Some faced quotas, despite what Johnson said, and some faced tariffs, despite what Johnson said. All of them faced mountains of paperwork and transport delays, again, despite what Johnson said. However, the same was not true in the other direction. We weren't ready to carry out any checks. For a whole year, EU businesses could basically send us whatever they wanted and we'd have no idea what it was. This is because Boris Johnson was trying to claim that all of this Brexit red tape that we'd warned about wouldn't appear. So of course he couldn't put anything in place to check it all. Because why are you building those facilities? To check the Brexit red tape, what that you said wouldn't be happening. Oh yeah. So he didn't do anything until it was too late, until he had his general election win, right? Not that importing remained easy. Rules were still in place, it's just no checks or enforcement. But most businesses are honest, so they still filled in the documentation as best they could, which is no easy task when you've got new systems and systems that often don't work because most new systems don't work. So even imports became more difficult and expensive. Also, the same lorries taking things out were bringing things back, so delays on the outward journey delays the return. And because British lorry drivers could no longer pick up and drop off lots of loads in the EU, the process of haulage became less efficient, driving prices up further. In 2022, we finally applied customs check, sort of, when the traffic wasn't too busy, which it mostly was, so we largely didn't bother. Then last year, we finally applied standards checks, again, sort of, for high-risk goods. There was simply no way of applying proper checks on incoming goods because Boris Johnson had spent all his time getting drunk with Kremlin stooges instead of actually preparing infrastructure. But even with fairly weak checks, the cost of food still increased. Paperwork was still required, whether honestly completed or not, and that takes time and therefore expense. And with lorries routinely being held up for 12 hours extra and sometimes more, an already struggling haulage sector was suddenly massively short-staffed and short-wheeled. But we're going in the opposite direction now. It's not exactly stunning news to learn that the government are not implementing planned Brexit checks after all, because they've been cancelling and postponing them for years. But what makes it different this time is that it's because of an agreement, albeit one that still needs finalising, and not because the government got cold feet about empty shelves or food price inflation. So what's happening in practical terms? Well, the medium risk agri-food products, mostly fruit and veg, are not going to need checks. There will still be a need for paperwork, but my understanding is that it won't be as much. For example, the health certificates won't be needed, which are a huge expense, as well as they need you to find a vet with the time to complete them. But the checks will disappear altogether. And not just on our end, but the EU side as well. Because if I say, oh, we won't be implementing these checks due next month, you might reasonably ask, well, hang on a minute, how does that make food cheaper? Yes, we understand how it stops food prices going up more, but it's not going to make the price come down. But the point is the EU, who had been applying full checks for over 4 years, they will now be rescinding theirs. Not quite as quickly. We have to finalise the details before the EU will act, but it is coming. This means that hauliers should be able to complete runs more quickly, with less hassle once it's all in place. Later on, we're going to be cancelling the checks on meat, dairy and fish, meaning it will be cheaper to trade those in both directions. So vegans get their Christmas early, carnivores have to wait a bit longer, vegetarians not too badly off, just waiting on the cheese. There are still going to be Brexit problems with food supplies. They don't all go away. Cabotage, still an issue. In an ideal world, as we had in the EU, British lorry drivers, right, they would deliver some goods to a location in the EU. Then they would pick up a new load nearby, deliver that somewhere else, pick up another load nearby, and keep doing that in a circuit all the way back home. It means lorries could always have loads on board while their wheels are turning, which is what they get paid for. An empty lorry is using fuel and paying a driver, but they're not making money. But Brexit cabotage rules means British lorries can only complete 2 of these pick-up and drop-offs in the EU, with similar rules for EU lorries in Britain. So because the lorries won't be carrying as much on their circuit, there's no option but to charge more for what they are carrying. That all still adds the price for us. The fact that some paperwork will still exist means not only extra expense in terms of the staff that you need to pay to complete it, but the hassle still means we remain the customer of last resort. If there's another bad harvest in Europe, we still get shortages because it's easier to supply everyone else before us. So none of this compensates for being outside the single market. It does mitigate some of the damage. Like being punched in the gut instead of kicked in the balls. And yes, that is better. But the removal of checks and some of the worst of the paperwork is still a benefit, and it's a tangible benefit. The cost of obtaining a health certificate, gone. The need to keep lorries hanging around in lorry parks while a window is made available for clearance, gone. The lorry parks will still be needed, drivers still have to rest, and traffic flow will still need easing. This agreement is only for agri-food products at the moment, not all products, but that opens up an opportunity to get further agreements in time. Might we end up with almost all checks on commonly traded goods at any rate being eliminated after a few more summits? Maybe. There will still be some areas where it might not be worth it to align if we're going to go for a sector by sector approach, but there should be scope for more agreements like this in the future. And every time we agree to some alignment on goods, we reduce the cost of importing, we increase the viability of exporting. That is good for our GDP and jobs, and we ease haulage congestion. There is, of course, another big benefit. If we don't need checks on agri-food products at the border between, say, England and France, for example, which is where the focus is, we also don't need them between Britain and Northern Ireland. The very visible trade border between Britain and Northern Ireland created a lot of anxiety for unionists, as well as maintaining standards with the rest of Ireland, but not with Britain. Yes, I know that the main unionist party campaigned for it, but despite being constantly told that Brexit supporters knew what they were voting for, we knew what we were voting for, Phil. We knew we were voting to be poor. All right, then. I actually find it's really tough to find someone who really believes that. Certainly, this is not the Brexit the DUP wanted. Not obvious which one they did want, but it was not this. So by aligning standards on these goods and doing away with the need for checks, we eliminate some of the more aggravating aspects of Brexit in Northern Ireland. Again, Britain is not in the single market, so that trade border still exists between Britain and Northern Ireland, but it becomes less noticeable, so the aggravation dials down. So 2 tangible benefits straight away: cheaper food, because it will get cheaper when the EU need to stop their checks, and a happier Stormont. Maybe they have other troubles at the moment. And also there's been another little tangible benefit for Gibraltar, but I may talk about that separately. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and for more content you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.